Well, hello everybody. This is the Sylvain Rochon, the peaceful revolutionary, with another video coming at you. Today, it's been 2 weeks since my last video, so it's been a little bit of time. And I was thinking I would do something a little bit different because recently I've had several very interesting discussions about philosophy and science and the combination of both. And I thought I'd do a blog and a video about this subject. It's especially interesting because people I wouldn't expect to have very interesting approaches to the subject just automatically, spontaneously had very interesting ideas that very much match my own. And I've been in the same thought processes for a long time, and it's the first time I really see different kinds of thinking coming out of the woodwork, in particular in my circle, which is mostly scientific, professional business meetings and things like that. I just meet entrepreneurs. We start talking, we talk about philosophy, we talk about all sorts of topics, of course. But then when we talk about philosophy, about the origin of life and things that are sometimes avoided because it can create conflict and discussion, they come up with essentially what I've kind of discovered as as a truth, at least for myself, many years ago, about 25 years ago. Um, Essentially, this is anyway. I'm just going to go deep into the subject. Normally, we think about the origin of life along the lines of two mainstream ideologies. You got the deists that believe that essentially the God theory, so that some magical God created life in 6, 7 days, whatever, according to the scriptures of the different philosophies and religions that are based on a deity, and all the theories around how we evolve, not how we evolve, but the different species and the plant life and different things like that are typically seen as being the creation of the hand of some deity. Or more recently, especially in the States, you see the resurgence of a movement called the intelligent design movement, where the deists are arguing that God, being a designer, being an intelligent creature, intelligently design everything, and there's evidence of intelligent design because he was the guy designing. So you got that, and it's a little bit like talking about Santa Claus to me. But anyway, we'll get straight back into that. The second theory is the theory of evolution, which is fairly mainstream, discussed in the sciences and all this stuff, and very well perceived and observed. About 93% of the elite scientists are atheists and generally believe in the theory of evolution because it is a scientific theory, and the small 7% are religious, like as deists, I would say. Um, so it's very interesting. Whereas if you look at the mainstream population, you got 90% of people that are believers in a god of some sort, and 10% that are atheists and strict evolutionaries. Third theory, which is the one that I feel is very interesting, is the theory of scientific creation theory, which is what my various friends and business partners kind of came up with spontaneously out of their own thought. Well, we all know that thought doesn't come from just nowhere. I mean, they thought this made sense. They just told me about it, and when we were talking about philosophy, and it happens to be my own rendition of how life was created on Earth, because I'm Raelian, and that's it's something I've known about for 25 years after I read some books, well, a lot of books, and so it was very surprising that it basically came out. It makes sense that essentially life on Earth was creation by scientists that came from elsewhere, essentially aliens, basically came from elsewhere, came to Earth, created life, eventually created human beings. So intelligent design still, but people like scientists were intelligently kind of processing, iterating the different species of life, and and eventually created man. And man mistook them for gods because they were super primitive, and the scientists were very advanced technologically. So that's theory number three. That's kind of creeping up in popularity among the people that are, I consider, the elite, or the people that are more educated and read more and that kind of thing. So very interesting discussions we're having with the three different groups. One that is completely mystical, so it's based on belief. Number two is the people that are strict scientists, are basing themselves strictly on the available scientific evidence. And there's a group number three that is kind of pulling evidence from the evolution theory, the science, and also observation, and connecting from different fields like anthropology, archaeology, and different readings in general, kind of making a sense, because you can't really prove that extraterrestrial aliens, like in the scientific way, created life. We can demonstrate that it's possible because our science nowadays shows that we will be able to do it ourselves. So it's plausible that a more advanced species of humanoids or intelligence created life on Earth. It's entirely plausible, but there is no direct, tangible proof that this actually happened here on Earth, thousands, millions, or whatever amount of years ago, right? So I wanted just to go through a little bit deeper in all the three theories, just to present you with some tidbits, and you can research further and make up your own mind about what makes more sense to you. Theory number one, the God theory. Uh, Very, very well known. It really depends on which book your particular faith is based on. But in general, you got a God that created the universe out of nothing, and then essentially just did whatever he wants, and whatever happened because of magic, and he wanted to have some purpose and blah 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 blah. And the God is unfathomable. He's everywhere, and he's ultimately full of power, and nobody can see him. There's no direct evidence and no way to prove that he or she actually exists, or it actually exists. And there is a lot of discussion in the States about the intelligent design movement, where deists, in particular Catholics, of course, in the States, are trying to have the school system integrate the intelligent design theory, that the God theory, essentially, in the science class alongside evolution, which I'm completely against, because I mean, even though there's reasonable intelligence, sorry, reasonable evidence that um, that life could have been created or iterated through intelligent design as a concept, there's obviously no evidence of the designer or the designers. And so it's totally unscientific to to try to push that into the schools until there is actual evidence that where we can point, uh, and we can show that DNA had to have a designer behind it, that kind of thing, or at least like identifying in a very strict way the designer or designers. So in the classroom, we're very much limited to scientific theory, established science, which means theory of evolution in my mind, and we can talk about the other theories in philosophy and language classes, all this stuff. But I digress. Um, so evolutionary theory is very interesting. I do have some comments as a scientist myself. Um, there is quite a bit of the evolution theory that makes a whole bunch of sense. It's essentially what we call natural selection, and it's very, very well established that that a species in a certain environment, if the environment changes, it'll adapt, and it will the traits of the population that are better suited to the new environment will tend to survive and thus reproduce. And so there is a natural selection evolution of the species, but there's a very big difference between evolution and natural selection. Natural selection is a process of genetic auto selection because of need. The people that survive better survive more. So there's a transmission of traits that are already pre-existing that kind of follow, and it describes different species of animals and birds that are somewhat different in the different biomes and different regions of the planet, even though they're the same genetic material in a rough way. Uh, they've adapted naturally to different surroundings. That's the adaptability of species and natural selection. Evolution is a lot wider than that. It's more about, well, how did a fish become a reptile, and a reptile become a mammal, and a mammal become a human, for example? And that's like a much more macro observation, and that's where the fossils all come in with uh, Darwin's inference and description of evolution, because he mostly worked on natural selection in the Galapagos. And people confuse the two. Natural selection is very well established, whereas evolution is kind of full of holes. It is full of holes. There's two major holes that really, really bother me. One of them is abiogenesis, essentially a principle where at first there was a planet with no life, just chemicals and molecules, and then the first cell appeared out of this primordial soup of chemicals and energy, and then that cell was life. So the first instance of life that was able to reproduce itself, eat, poop, and do all these nice things that we take for granted. So the concept that a hop from no life to life is very hard to digest, and scientists have worked a long time trying to show that it would be possible, but it's ultimately extremely difficult to show it. To create life out of really nothing, just chemicals and energy reproducing the environments from the early Earth. The scientists Miller and Urey, and these are Miller-Urey experiments. I'll post a link about that in the video. They were able to show that if you take the molecular soup that existed at the time and you put lightning and different conditions, it's possible to generate complex organic molecules. So a little bit more complex than the run-of-the-mill molecules that you'd have like around the house. More like simple proteins and amino acids and things like that, which are a little bit more complex, but yet it's not like big like hemoglobin or a DNA strand or anything like that. It's still fairly complex, but not huge molecules. They were able to show that these molecules that are essential for life would be created. There's other experiments that were able to show that other molecules, like adenine, which is an integral part of DNA, would spontaneously get formed in those soups as well. We can show that lipid membranes can spontaneously form very easily. You can do that in your kitchen even, just with fat and water. I mean, they'll form, and that's the lipid membrane is what we. This is something very primitive. The cell has a lipid membrane as well, which is a lot more complex. But it shows that primitive forms of organic of life can be created just out of molecules and energy. But from the molecules to going to a cell, like inside the membrane, you can have these complex molecules kind of migrating inside the membrane, for example, naturally without any help of anybody. But going from a soup, an amalgam of protein of cells, amalgam of molecules inside a lipid membrane to a working cell that can subsist and conserve its characteristics through DNA, RNA, and also consume energy and remove energy and doing these various things is far shot. It still hasn't been shown or proven. So abiogenesis is still a big question mark as far as science is concerned. The other gap I really despise is the gap between fossils, and everybody knows about this part at least. You know, we find, for example, a fossil that is said to be 100 million years old, for example, or whatever. And then the next generation of fossil, according to phenotics, like just the way it looks like the next fossil in the evolutionary tree is, let's say, I don't know exactly, maybe 11 or 101 million years, or a little bit later. It doesn't really matter the time span so much, like as the differences between between the fossils, and there are significant differences between the two animals. And the way the scientists have justified this possible hop is that it is justifiable given the time spans that are really big according to carbon dating, that random mutations due to natural selection and due to some extreme environmental changes, perhaps, or chemicals in the environment, or just stress, would kind of make a mutation hop, like a very strong mutation that would be positive and beneficial to the survival of the creature, and to go from one to another really quickly, so that it would explain why we can't find fossils of the in between, because genetically, like two species that are very, very similar, usually genetically are quite different. So there's a lot of mutations that need to survive through reproduction, through a lot of iterations. And the scientists are saying that to kind of fit in the model, and to kind of make sense as far as how big the hops are between the two organisms, you need about 100,000 generations. So in comes the E. coli long-term evolution experiment, providing the links of all this stuff below, where they say, well, okay, we can't have monkeys go through 100,000 generations because we'll be dead by then, but we can do that with bacteria. So what they took 12 different samples of the exact same genetic material, bacteria, E. coli, as the bacteria name, and they gave them the exact same environment, which was fairly harsh but still survivable. So we gave them some stress and let them divide and multiply, and then periodically they would test them for genetic mutations and things like that. And what's really interesting is that now they're at about 65,000 generations. It started in 1988, so it's been a while. There's a lot of generations, even though bacteria divide and create new generations very quickly. They've calculated approximately 1 million mutations. 10 to 20 of them are beneficial, or beneficial to a slight degree. One of them was very interesting. It allowed the bacteria in one of the samples to process citrate as an energy source in a aerobic environment, which means with air. It could already do that in an anaerobic environment. So without the air, it could already process citrate, but now it could do it with air involved, because one of the proteins was mutated a little bit, and it allowed processes of the processing of citrate when oxygen is available. Though it's quite beneficial to the bacteria, it's a very, very small jump genetically, because it's just like a small change in one particular protein, and through just sheer luck, it allows the bacteria to process this chemical as an energy source with air. But it already had all the mechanisms to process all the chain of reactions to process a citrate in the first place from the source. So if you figure 100,000 generations is necessary to do a big jump, and we're 65,000 with bacteria, and the biggest change is just a small change like that, where now they can process it with the air, where they could already do it without the air. It's not really impressive. That probably means the bacteria needs to either divide a lot more, like lot more generations, maybe 100, like 1 million generations or more before there's a significant change. Before for example, the bacteria starts, has another type of membrane, for example, or is now two or three cells altogether, or something that would be significant or and comparative to two different skeletons and two different animals that have significant differences. Like one has feathers and the other one doesn't, for example. In the evolutionary train, to kind of match the theory of 100,000 generations to do a hop genetically. So that's a big hole. And to me, both those two elements, those two holes in evolutionary theory, just make me doubt the whole thing altogether. I like the natural selection. I like there's a bunch of good science, but if we can't prove abiogenesis and you can't prove those hops through natural means, it means it must be unnatural means, which brings me to the third theory, which is the scientific creation theory. If you avoid the idea that an immaterial, omnipresent God would be involved in intelligent design, if you had actual scientists iterating, starting with small animals and bacteria, not small bacteria at first, and then small plants, and then bigger plants, more complex, and eventually like leveraging the previous genetic codes and learning and processing, and then it wouldn't make a lot of sense in a lab environment that whatever would be released in the environment would have had significant work inside the lab, for example, for a while, and before it's released in the environment. So you'd see a difference between one skeleton to another skeleton shape, and maybe letting the animals live for a while, see how they behave with each other in the ecosystem, that kind of thing, over a certain number of years, and then remove the animals. Maybe make a bigger, better version of the previous animal, experimenting with flight and whatnot, with going more and more complex, and eventually ending up with Homo sapiens. And then Homo sapiens obviously were, according to, if you look at mythology, where gods were walking among men, had children with men. If you look at religious texts, there was intermixing with the god figures, or the angels, the Elohim, all the terminology relative to the people that were the creators, essentially, and humans. And the humans, that they were the ones much later that wrote about it or drew things about these individuals, and they were talking about burning chariots in the sky, flying the sky, which sounded like thunder. They were talking about different analogies with items that they knew at the time themselves, but they couldn't explain the science of these creators that were flying around doing experiments and kind of watching, using much higher technology. So all these stories about gods, like the Roman, Greek, Indian, Mayan pantheon of gods, they all talk about gods that are like people that have emotions, they have quarrels, they have they fight among each other, different things like that. Sounds very human to me, just not human this generation, the more advanced generation of humans that came here with technology and created life. So that makes a lot more sense to me. Of course, I can't prove it unless we find some laboratory somewhere in an African jungle that is thousands of years old, or more, or a spaceship or something like that we didn't build. But as far as connecting the dots between anthropology, archaeology, like the pyramids everywhere, for example, and different like Stonehenge and different structures like that we know quite clearly we can't make today very easily with that precision, and certainly not with the tools from the Bronze Age. There's a bunch of experiments that were done for the pyramids, for example, where they tried to cut the stones with the tools of the time, which were also stone or bronze, and it was impossible to cut them properly. and only now today with lasers we can cut the stones with the proper precision to be able to position it. So it's really like these mysteries can be explained by the presence of technology way back when, and the stories that come from our mythology also could explain the contact between primitive humanity that wrote the stories or told about the stories and more advanced civilizations that were there, kind of supervising and kind of watching and interacting. So I would encourage individuals and you guys to explore different links. I'm showing a link to the Raelian movement, where you can download the book Intelligent Design: A Message from the Designers, which could be very interesting for you guys if you want to read about the scientific creation theory. I believe it's one of the most complete books you can find. There's a bunch of other references about ancient aliens, for example, from Eric von Daniken, a very popular archaeologist and historian from I believe, the 60s and 70s and 80s, especially. And of course, you can look at myths and legends from around the world that kind of talk about, people that created life went back to the sky and will come back later. And these kind of legends that are very indicative in different culture of a similar storyline, and also of people that come from the sky, like actual people, like Elohim, for example, is in the Bible. It was replaced a lot by God in the later translations of the Bible, of course. But Elohim is Hebrew. It means those who came from the sky. It's a plural word, but it's translated to a singular God word incorrectly, in my view. So check it all out. You're welcome to any opinion. And there's a lot of debate about this. There's a lot of debate between atheists and deists, and there's these pioneering ideologists, I would call them, like myself, I guess, and others that say, well, intelligent design, not with God, but maybe scientific aliens that came, then it would kind of tie everything together. That's also could be a valid opinion for yourselves. Why not? Anyway, that's it for me for now. Enjoy the links, and hope I'll talk to you some more at another time. Ciao.